the evolution of Ms. Noyes in the course of her life from being the young, wealthy, young woman, debutante type person to literally falling on her face in front of the White House, pretending that she was dead in 1969 and lying there in the street, according to the Washington Post, for 2 hours. And at age 69, she was the oldest of the activists protesting the war in Vietnam. So from debutante to activist for peace and social justice. I didn't have to ask this question at the last group because I was talking about Alfred B. Hilton, who died in 1864. How many of you personally knew Mrs. Noyes? See? This is a little pressure, see? At least the percentage has gone down. I first gave this talk at the Hayes High House several months ago. And when the first reservation came in, they got all hyper and they called me and said, "Jim, do you know that some of the Noyes relatives are coming?" I said, "Yes, and I know them, and I'm grateful, I'm happy they're coming." Well, as it turns out, it was about a third of the audience, okay? It was about a third of the audience, so it's gone down to maybe a tenth of the audience. So, and I'm very delighted that you're here. When I spoke at this last time, I said, well, I'm looking forward to, in the future, giving a talk that's slightly different. I'm hoping to, in the next coming months, to go up to Haverford University, Haverford College, because they have the records there of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Harford County branch, Northeastern branch. And I just learned today that we have a member of that here, Mr. Dave Davis, okay? A Kelly, not surprisingly, was with Ms. Noyes and Miss Woodward, a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Harford County, Northeastern Harford County branch. Well, when I gave that talk last time, I said, hope to get up to Haverford. Well, I never could get my schedule and Haverford's schedule to jive. I didn't really want to go up there when the students were on campus because, that's their first and foremost responsibility in their archives is to meet the needs of the students. And they have an enormous peace collection. This is Haverford, okay? But also Swarthmore have an enormous peace collection. I have done research. I've exhausted what research I could do down at Goucher, which was the focus of all this. But my hopes especially rested on Stanford University. And I ordered from Stanford University the entire manuscript of the entire interview they did with her, which is on tape, an enormous amount of money to get it on tape. But I was able to convince them that we are a really poor group of people here at historic site of Harford County. So they actually changed the policy. But I didn't look at the line where it says 4 to 6 weeks between submitting your order or your request and receiving it. So literally I've been looking in the mailbox. This morning I looked in the mailbox, nothing in the mailbox. I come in, the first thing my wife says, "Jim, the stuff from Stanford came." Jim hasn't had a chance to read it. But you'll get copies of it, and I'll synthesize it and whatever, talking about her nanny, okay? Talking about the nanny and all those good things. And down in Selma, I'm just giving you all a preview of what's coming up ahead. Richard, by the way, remember, I don't wear a clock, and I don't wear a watch. So the Calvert School here, talking about the Calvert School, and her English nanny, and so forth, so on. And anyhow, I'm really sorry that I ordered it too late, and they sent it out too late. But here's an opportunity for it to come back again. So, but this will definitely be incorporated into the article. So, anyhow, I will get going. There's Jacob. Next one, please. So I originally wasn't going to show you this, but the beauty of that was one of the lovely things that the Hayes High House produces. And if you've not been to programs at the Hayes High House, you really need to do it. It's just truly a treasure, a very, very unknown treasure. And this coming Thursday and then the subsequent Thursday, they're having 2 programs dealing with historic preservation and also dealing with the history of the movement from that property, from the horse farm that it was under the Highs to the college itself. So look online. You probably got stuff from them in the mail. They have wonderful programs. How many have ever been to a program at the Hayes High House? Now, that's maybe a third, maybe a half, but you all need to go. Jacob. Okay, Ms. Noyes' background. Ms. Noyes comes from a very wealthy background. This is her father, a banker, a philanthropist. He was, just to pick out one thing, he was the chairman of the board of trustees of the Baltimore Trust, I think it was called in those days. But very, very wealthy individual. And her mother came from a similar, at least wealthy background from New York society. They lived in the Hudson River Valley near where the home of, you see it right there, marriage, 7 October 1897, Kinderhook. And for those of you who are presidential freaks, Kinderhook is the name of the town, the home where President Martin Van Buren came from. So how exactly Mr. Newcomer and Ms. Vanderpoel met, I've not been able to yet determine. But anyhow, that's the parents. I am told by Ms. Washburn that Mrs. Noyes was a very humble lady. She did not like having her picture taken. But fortunately for the family and for us, her father had a lot of money and he could hire some wonderful painters, portrait painters. So that is Mrs. Noyes here on the right, and then that's her younger sister and her brother. So there were the 3 of them. That is Mrs. Noyes. By the way, Ms. Noyes was born in 1902, as I didn't mention, but they are, Ms. Noyes there in that picture on the left would have been about 6. The brother, I think, was a year or 2 older, and then the sister was younger. And Mrs. Washburn told me the wonderful story about how you notice her left hand. Well, the left hand was the subject of a news article in the Baltimore paper because she was with her family at the Baltimore Zoo and decided to see if the bear wanted something. Well, the bear did, and it was half her hand, her finger rather, as well as whatever she was holding. So this was the picture in the newspaper of Mrs. Noyes, Adelaide Noyes at the time. Mrs. Noyes grew up in that neighborhood. Now, I don't think there's a person in this room who has been in Maryland more than at least 6 months who doesn't recognize that neighborhood. She grew up in the area around Mount Vernon Place. And where possible, I've tried to get pictures of the era rather than just the pictures today of this time. By the way, the pictures in here, because of Mrs. Noyes' preference not to be photographed too often, the pictures overwhelmingly are not of her, but of individuals doing the same things she did. So I have to be transparent about that. I guess if I'm being transparent, I'll say that I recognize Mrs. Noyes, but to my knowledge, I never did meet Mrs. Noyes. Here is Charles Street undergoing an earthquake. I don't know why it came out that way. I have no clue. I just right-click like every other picture I do, and somehow or other, that's how it happened. But we all recognize going down Charles Street there, Peabody Bookstube to our right, a little bit back farther. But there's the monument in front of us. The Walters off to the left. and other pictures of this period of time, turn of the 20th century, I have to say now. I've now been told, don't just say turn of the century, you have to say turn of the 20th century. So, and this is what the Walters looked like at that time. At that time, turn of the century, early 20th century, this is how museums were decorated. It sort of looks like Hauser's restaurant, doesn't it? But there's the Engineers Club on the right, and there's the Peabody Institute on the right, both looking like they did 100 years ago. And this is one of my favorite places in the world on the left. Who recognizes that?
Maryland Historical.
Right, James would, you would, right? Would recognize the Maryland Historical Society. And it's, the only thing is Francis O'Brien is not in there. He is the modern day man standing back here in the corner. But O'Brien, Francis, it's Francis last name. I think it's O'Brien. Okay, so moving on. But this is where young Miss Adelaide Noyes would go. You know, no television, no mobile devices. That's where she would go. And she was an inveterate reader. I was, again, confirmed that in talking to the Noyes, the Washburns out at their home. And this is her home. 105 West Monument Street. That's what it looks like today. I could not find a contemporary photo, but that's her home. Her father had bought the old hotel. It was a Congress Hotel. I haven't had a chance today to look at my notes, but anyhow, he bought the Congress Hotel and he fixed it up into a house. And the other part, the dogleg part, it remained a hotel around the corner. But it is open today. It is in use today. And the two offices on the first floor, Jacob, will give you some idea of the affluence, the opulence in which she was raised. Richard, can you do something about these lights? Where's Richard? I just can't, they don't seem to be very good here. I can't believe it's any better. But, I forget. One of them is a club, and the other one is the publishing house, Agora Publishing. Am I right on that? So, anyhow, that gives you some idea of what her rooms were growing up. Now, as you go upstairs, of course, they're not going to have the 12 or 16-foot ceilings and so forth and so on. This is the public floor of the home, but, Wall Street Daily and the Oxford Club Library, okay? So, moving on. Now, Mrs. Noyes was educated first at home. I didn't know that. I did get to see one that she said she was, I saw in here, homeschooled for a while. But then she was enrolled in the Calvert School first, and the Calvert School's, sort of at-home program. But then the Calvert School began to open its own buildings in a local house. And of course, we're talking grand kind of a structure house. And then eventually built this home around the corner on Chase Street or Reed Street. I'm not exactly sure which now. And that strange-looking thing at the top, anybody know what that is? That's the playground. That's the playground. It's in the city. And this particular view of the school, you can't see what it was adjacent to. Obviously, it's built adjacent to another home. And I don't know why they would have had a parking lot there in that time, but that was not their property. You're looking at their property on the upper left, and you're looking inside to a laboratory on the right, and then there is a classroom. And since Mrs. Noyes herself was born in 1902, and that photograph is said to have been taken in 1910, Adelaide could have been in there. I like to think that's young Adelaide. And if it's after her visit to the zoo and we get a big enough microscope, we're going to zoom in on that left hand, okay? But so she was educated in a rather progressive ways. You know, when I first started researching and putting these facts together, I began to think, the sort of upper class, debutante, wealthy child, so forth, so on. But these were progressive schools she was going to. These were schools who believed that females had merit as scholars and so forth and so on, and were students. And it wasn't something simply left to the boys as it exists on the right. Their headmaster, as he was called, was a graduate of Harvard, and he had come down to Baltimore. He'd been hired to come down from Harvard to Baltimore to be the second headmaster of the Calvert School. The first one was a local man, and their program began to become more progressive. Now, especially when I used to think about Miss Porter's school, I always thought of Miss Porter's school as the sort of archetypical place for wealthy young women to go to, seminary kind of programs, like the old two-year schools, like St. Mary's of Maryland used to be a two-year school, and Villa Julie was a two-year school for young women, where they could learn secretarial skills and where they could learn the fine arts and ballroom dancing and all that sort of thing. Well, Miss Porter's school, on the other hand, by the time Miss Noyes got there, and that would have been in 1920, had become itself a little bit more progressive, and like the Calvert School, had begun incorporating, still only a two-year program, but began to incorporate academic subjects into it. Now, if you recognize the young women on the right, you probably only recognize one of them. And I just want to make the connection between Miss Porter's school, where Adelaide Noyes went to school from, 1918 to 1920. The woman on the right, in the sleigh, and that was one of the nice pictures I found of the time, and the woman on the third from the left in the bottom. You might recognize who that is? Jackie Kennedy. And there have been a couple other presidential wives, I can't remember at this moment, who went to Miss Porter's school, but they're a very proud school. They now call themselves Porters. They've dropped the myth, although I'm sure it's part of their incorporation papers. But it wasn't just the sort of foo-foo kind of thing that young women would have learned in some of the other schools. This was not one of the sister schools, of course, being Bryn Mawr and Mount Holyoke and Wesley and schools like that. But for a two-year school, it was headed in that direction. It is now, of course, a four-year school. Where? Connecticut. Framingham, Connecticut. It's in Connecticut. Now, one of the things, in addition to the academics, that would have drawn Adelaide Noyes to this school was, of course, her love of horses. And Mrs. Noyes was a lifelong equestrian. I don't know at what age she had to give that up, but she was born with horses, and she, all her life, surrounded herself by horses. It'd be interesting to find out where did the newcomers store their horses, where they board their horses. They were members of the Elkridge Club, so that's likely the answer, but I don't know that for sure. Okay? But again, we thank Jackie Kennedy for being part of the equestrian club, else I would not have photographs to show you of the equestrian activities at the Porter School. So she was there from 1917 to 21. So her formal education, Adelaide Noyes' formal education, ended at age 19. But as I said, she was a lifelong reader, and she was surrounded by culture where she lived in the city. And her education, like most people, I would hope, continued on. Yes, she was a debutante. Now, I don't know if that institution still exists. It probably does. There was an article in the Baltimore paper a month or two ago about the Blue Book. Is it the Blue Book or the Red Book? The Blue Book. And it is still published. And it was the list of all the very socially acceptable families and what clubs they belonged to and who they had, what daughter was up and coming, the debutante, and so forth, so on. So, but this is Adelaide Newcomer's debutante photo as it appeared in the Baltimore News American. And we're hoping someday when your dusty nose books and up there in the attic. Now, these are just some of the photos, not hard at all, using the internet and in particular using newspapers. These are all Baltimore newspapers, although it could have been Washington, could have been New York, because they were all interconnected. It was the East Coast Society, I guess. But these are all little clippings I put together, giving some idea of the sort of life that Miss Noyes, newcomer, that's Vanderpool, by the way. Somebody asked me, what does the V stand for? Vanderpool, of course. So, dances, card clubs, balls, traveling, did a lot of traveling and would stay abroad for weeks and months on end, particularly at beaches, things like that. So just try it yourself. Just go to the internet, go on to Baltimore Sun especially, and type in newcomer and focus on the 20s, and you'll come up with an enormous number of hits yourself. I just picked out a few. By the way, one other thing in terms of transparency, big word, but if you would like to know what is the source, where did I get that article, or what date was that published, and so forth, so on, I have all that information. It's just, you don't want to clutter up your images with all that kind of information. And when it becomes an article in Hartford Historical Bulletin, you'll have footnotes, or probably I'll decide to put it as endnotes. But here is the life the young woman would lead as a young woman who has made her debut into society at the bachelor's cotillion, riding and parties and golfing and bridge clubs, I suspect as much. I cannot say this, but that sure looks like Miss Noyes to me, and Miss Newcomer to me on the far left. If we were to go back and look at, and Jacob, it'll just confuse the issue too much, but if we were to go back to look at her there you go. Thank you, Jacob. And you go forward now to, of course, I see my historical subjects everywhere. Anybody here when I gave the talk on John Adams Webster out at Mount Adams? I swear I'm reincarnated. Anyhow, okay, Jacob, thank you. Well, as I mentioned before about her love and the family's love with horses, they were members of the Elkridge Club, which, of course, eventually combined with the Hartford Elkridge Club, whose historian is in the back room, Mariana. But in addition to chasing the hounds and timber fencing and things like that, that, I believe, is Hampton in the background. Again, I don't know that she's in there, but that's the sort of thing that consumed her life. And especially, of course, before she was married, before she had children, and so forth, so on. And there's the other part of her life. I haven't found her in any of these pictures. But we're talking months on end. We're not talking the SST, which, of course, no longer exists. But this sort of thing and all the partying and the galas and go on board, even the ships. And again, they must have had a house. I don't know this for sure, but they sure spent a lot of time in this one particular part of France. All right. Mrs. Newcomer becomes Mrs. Noyes, okay? Now, Victor Park Noyes is a young man. He had been a very prominent football player for the Naval Academy. He spent, I believe, 2 years at the Naval Academy. He left, I'm not sure why yet. I'll keep at it. But he left and eventually joined the United States Army. And as you see in the second line of the left-hand clip, he was stationed at Fort Hoyle. And he was an equestrian, and I'm sure that's where they met somehow. although Army officers, again, are the sort of individuals who would be invited to the balls and the parties and so forth and so on. I don't know for a fact, but Dave, we're going to find out someday whether Victor Park Noyes is related to our Noyes up in New England. Dave and I followed each other to the Noyes Mansion in Oneida, New York. I came in, I was the first person in the morning. I looked and I said, went to Wright Bel Air, Maryland. You know, Carolyn and Jim Chrismer, I went to Wright Bel Air, Maryland. And the last person the previous day was Bel Air, Maryland. It was Dave Davis. So anyhow, we'll find out. And it was a great possibility because given the nature of complex marriage and how many children, what was his first name, that Noyes? We'll find out. And he does come from Vermont, right? Part of the world. So now, by the way, back up, please, Jacob. There are conflicts, there are contradictions in the printed record in the newspapers. One indication is that the young couple was married at the home, 105 West Monument. Another indication on the right was that the couple was married at Christ Church. And we talked about that at the time we were out at the community college, and it was definitely Mrs. Washburn's impression that her mother was married in the church. And I said, well, I can't find any church. And then Jim Wallen gave me the name that he thought it was under today. So it is an African-American Episcopal church, but they use a different name. And so I now do have, but have yet to incorporate into the presentation, picture of that church today. I think I have one of what it looked like at the time, but it's just too blurry and it's too, it's one of those tiny little things, and when you blow it up, it could look like any church. If you go to the next one now, there's a picture of Mr. Noyes. You'll notice that he was 5 years younger than this newcomer, and that he died relatively early. So at his age 58, he died, and she would have been 53 when her father died. Now that is a bridal dress, okay? Now I believe, I believe that it was taken in the home. And one of those early pictures, and we don't want to go back, and there's too many slides ago, Jacob, but one of those early pictures I showed you of the first floor of 105 West Monument, through the doorway, I believe you can see the staircase. And that's what stands out in my mind. And I have the clipping, as I'm sure you all do, of the description of the gown and, the party and so forth, so on. But there is Adelaide newcomer, age 25, now Mrs. Noyes. And here a few years ago, subsequently, there is Miss Newcomer Noyes. There's Victor, and that's Miss Washburn's sister, Margaret, who sadly died about 6 months ago, but who I was delighted was able to join us at the presentation at the Hayes High House. So I don't know whether that is the home. I think that's what today is Bordy Vineyard. It's an estate called Long Green. And when they were first married, the summer before when they were first married, after they came back from a month of traveling in a car throughout the country, and I would love to find out their itinerary, but when they came back for the rest of the summer, they rented a home in the valley and then bought the home from another couple. It's a long, complex story and involves crime and so forth and so on, but it was all one reason why this one family sold the house and the Noyes family bought it So I believe, given that Margaret's age, this would be about 1930, would you say, Ms. Washburn, 1930? That's in the property that's part of Bordy Estates today. And one of the reasons, of course, they were interested in that property is because of their mutual interest in horses. And it was there that they began their partnership, you might call it, in raising, training, riding horses. And Mr. Newcomer particularly was interested in being a trainer, and for a few years, so was Mr. Noyes was interested in being a trainer, and for a few years, Adelaide had to become the chief trainer because there was some issues with the racing commission. I don't know what it was, but anyhow. And again, they're just to emphasize the interest in the equestrian. That is Miss Noyes, Newcomer. This Newcomer Noyes, that's Mrs. Noyes. It's 1930 in the upper left-hand picture. Her husband adored flying, and he made her learn to fly. And I don't know if they were allowed, given the laws of those days, they might well have been allowed to land on their own property, probably were. But she said in a number of interviews that she hated flying. And I guess it's one of those things the dutiful wife did for the husband. But I don't think you were ever taken up in a flight, were you? Yeah. I think she quit as soon as she could. But these, again, are the sort of activities. Now, this is not, that's the only picture there that shows Mrs. Noyes. But I did put that picture in the lower left, and because, again, this is the sort of thing Mr. Noyes and Mrs. Noyes would have done on the days of the point-to-point or the timber races and whatever else. Now, I know Mariana recognizes who the person at the left is. It is Harvey. In Harford County, there's only one Harvey, Ledoux. So Harvey Ledoux, and I think the next picture, yes, look at that. Okay, still happens every, April in Maryland. And again, I like to think that noises were in there somewhere, and depending on what year it was, seems to me it was early 30s. And again, if we were to examine the cars more carefully, you might be in there. You might be in there, right? If it's the middle 30s, you know. Did you have a nanny?
Maybe they left.
Maybe they left you home. You sure don't remember it, huh? Okay. Now, the noises raced all over the state. And as you see in the right-hand corner, they did race in West Virginia. How far outside the state they got, I don't really know. They did race at Bel Air. They did race at Pimlico. They raced at Laurel. But I believe most, from what I can tell, and I didn't go through every year of the record, I believe most of the time they raced at Marlborough and Charlestown and Bel Air and the places like that, the smaller tracks, maybe there's one in Hagerstown too, right? So, Brady, the one in Hagerstown? Okay. So, but, yep. Well, you know what your colors were? Your colors? The racing colors?
Blue and gold.
Blue and gold, there you go. And since I'm from Calvert Hall, I'll forgive you having Loyola colors. But, and there you go. One of their best-known horses was Trebon. And one of the horses, it was internationally known. It's this one. And it had to stand at quarantine. And it was brought into Baltimore for the Maryland race season. And it stood at quarantine at the Noyes property at Long Green. So it's the sort of things Mrs. Clark does up in Darlington now. Horses from all over the world that need to be in quarantine for whatever reason or other are kept up there at Rigby Farm. And that's one of the uses of Long Green Valley here. Long Green farm. Okay? Now, we're going to make the transition. And thank God for Edna Goldberg. Edna Goldberg, for anybody who wants to do history of Harford County, particularly in the second half of the 20th century, is very much indebted to Ms. Goldberg for the many feature articles that she wrote. I guess she wrote basic news stories as well. But Ms. Goldberg, who was a fixture on Main Street for years, wrote this article and talking about the daughter of Waldo Newcomer, a champion of unpopular causes. So this lady who came from this very social background, who was very much part of the scene in the city in the second half of her life, even while she had children, but especially after her children were grown, at least teenagers, she began to become much more publicly active. Previous to that, most of her espousal or opposition to causes of one sort or another was in the form of, don't go ahead yet, was in the form of letters to the newspaper. And that's another thing you don't have to look hard for. Letters to the newspaper. And it seems to me it sort of struck fear in the hearts of people when they saw Bel Air, Maryland, Adelaide Noyes. I think it struck fear in their hearts. Now, when looking back at her life, and you wonder, well, how is it that this young woman raised with this kind of background, how is it that she wound up being somebody who would stand for or lie on the ground for 2 hours in front of the White House? The guard, by the way, after 4 or 5 people had, the White House guard, after 4 or 5 people had, after a name was called, collapsed in front of him, he says, "I must have bad breath." So, well, her father, absolutely, I'm convinced, because yes, he was very, very wealthy. Yes, he was very high up in financial circles. I liken him to the Bill McGurk, so to speak, of his day. People may not know how high up Bill McGurk was in finances in the state of Maryland, and in particular the city of Baltimore, but I liken Mr. Newcomer to that. But he was, in his own way, I believe, if not internationally, he was a proponent of social causes. He had spent some time, for example, he didn't graduate to my knowledge, but he had spent some time at the Friends School, even though he himself was a pillar of the local Episcopal Church. Now, she herself, and this is something that's probably going to be very, very helpful at this particular point, what they sent me from Stanford, but she herself, in an interview, said that one of the books that she read that really opened her eyes to the way, from her perspective, the way the world operated, and particularly World War I, was a book called Now It Can Be Told. Now, the now is following World War I. During World War I, if you date the date of the U.S. entrance in 1917, she was 15 years old. So she's a teenager during World War I. And she said, and I can't think of the exact quote, but she said something to the effect that at that time, during the war, World War I, she was horribly militaristic. And she was a member of the Navy League, and she was a member of the Red Cross, and being a teenage girl and doing what she could do, she dutifully rolled bandages, and she may have written to soldiers and this sort of thing. But then she began to read, and this particular book is the one she said really opened her eyes. Philip Gibbs was a reporter. He was an English reporter on the front lines with English troops. And the thesis of his book is that the British people, the people of the Allied forces, were being fed propaganda like nobody's business. And that it was not simply the Germans, it was the English and the Germans, and it was all a for money. Okay? And she read that, and we haven't found the copy around the house, But Pratt still has it, folks. Pratt still has it. God bless the Maryland Interlibrary Loan. Now, some other things. She said also that she was a great reader of the Bible. Makes sense. Someone raised in the Protestant church, the Episcopal church, and that the Beatitudes are her favorite passage from the Beatitudes. Somewhere in one of my researches, I found out that she was also devoted very much to the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love, and so forth and so on. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. So reading the New Testament, which is, of course, Christ's word, as opposed to the Old Testament, the eye for eye and the tooth for a tooth look at life. Now, born and raised a Episcopalian, she nonetheless did convert somewhat later, after even she had begun her social activism. She did become a member, and I believe was a lifelong member, of Little Falls Meeting, okay, and Fallston, and living in Bel Air. That, more than going up to Deer Creek, Friends up in Darlington, would have been the logical place for her to have attended meeting. And somebody said to me, oh, well, is that where she's buried? And that would make sense, except, again, thinking about her beliefs. No, she had her body devoted to the medical research. So I believe her father is down. Yeah, I have a picture of her father's. That's the Pratt. We're talking about influences now, remember? So the Quaker Church was an enormous influence on her. And when she started to become activistic, she went to the Quakers and they said, oh, yes, we very much would like to have your support, and you can attend these meetings and these particular meetings and focus. But they also recommended another group to her that she began to become even more devoted to. But that's the Pratt, and that's where she would have typically gotten her books in those days, not in the building that we think of across from the Basilica, the Catholic Basilica. Jim, what street was that on? Was that on?
Mulberry, right around the corner from...
Why, was this then on the site of the current Pratt?
No, current Pratt goes...
Parallel to the... Okay. But it was down there on... Oh, yeah, there's a slope, because Mulberry comes up from Howard Street. Okay? See, I always want to have Jim Walling in any of my talks for just questions like that. Pratt Street and reading was very important to her. Social activism. There we go. When she went to the Quakers, who were very welcoming, of course, to her as a member, but also someone who would support their causes and be a witness to their causes, they especially recommended the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom to her. It was an organization founded by the women in 1915 during the war. The person you will think of most when you think of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was founded at The Hague, makes sense, was Jane Addams. And again, I got enough of a glance in here to say, yes, she knew Jane Addams. So, and she had met Jane Addams and so forth, so on. So WILPF, and you'll see that in a few more photographs. She was a lifelong member of the WILPF. She founded the Northeast Maryland chapter of the WILPF. She first joined the Baltimore chapter, then she joined the Maryland chapter, and then founded the Northeast Maryland. And Dave tells me he was at least, what do they call it during the McCarthy era? You were a...
Hard Derek.
No, well, no, yeah, card carrying. No, you...
Hard.
Yeah. He was token young. Okay. But she was a lifelong member of the ACLU and also of the NAACP. Very active with the NAACP. There's a great story. There's a great story about Dr. Willis. Dr. Willis, you may know, was no fan of integration and did his best to keep Harford County from complying with Brown versus Board of Education. And his policies extended to the Girl Scouts. After 54, Harford County built Central Consolidated, and Havre de Grace Consolidated. They had every African-American child in the east part of the county in one school, and every African-American child, all bused, of course, to the other school. And Mrs. Gladys Williams, who was also a member of the Northeast chapter, was planning to have her Girl Scouts from Central Consolidated go to this festival that was being held at Bel Air High School for all the Girl Scouts in Harford County. And Mrs. Noyes went to her and said, Gladys, they're not going to let you in there. Gladys, everybody will be embarrassed and your girls will be mortified and so forth and so on. So she warned Gladys, and I have a picture of Ms. Williams in a few minutes, not to do that, but she would see to it that they had their own festival among African-American troops of girls and Girl Scouts. All right, and there's what I said earlier, struck hearts in the fear of anybody who took a stand or wrote a letter to the Baltimore Sun, because you could expect Ms. Noyes would comment on it. This happens to be April 11th, 1954, here, because they're talking in this article about how Baltimore baseball team will be horribly embarrassed by the fact that no Baltimore hotels will accept baseball teams with black players. And the Sun had written a editorial or a comment about that. And of course, she talks about the sad state of affairs in this country, the country during the Cold War, which claims to be the leader of the free world. So, and she goes on to talk about housing and theaters and so forth and so on. The article over to the right, the confession, was in answer to all those people who did not want African-American people sitting in restaurants and encounters with them out of fear then that some black man was going to come up to some white man and propose something nasty to her, or maybe even ask her out on a date or something like that. I hereby make public confession of the fact that although I'm a white woman, I do not marry all the men who at one time or another happen to eat in the same restaurant with me. So take your kite and go fly it. Let's pass these laws, okay? But there it is, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It exists today. It still exists today. It goes on. So it's now 115. It's now 101 years old. And were Mrs. Noyes around, she would have been over in The Hague in celebration of that. I don't know if, Mrs. Woodward has died. Mrs. Williams is in her late 90s, so I'm sure she didn't go, although to the 100th anniversary, although she was there for the 50th anniversary in 1965. But they still have a chapter, probably at Hopkins, and certainly at Goucher. Goucher has been the center of a lot of this. There they are. Ms. Noyes is not in there, but these are the people who helped organize that. And so Jane Addams is in there somewhere, and that's their modern update logo in the right-hand corner. Jacob. Now, in 1963, as I indicated, Mrs. Noyes and some of her friends established the Northeastern branch. And it was, from the get-go, it was integrated. And it principally was Harford County, but there were some Cecil County and a couple Carroll County individuals. Now, Mrs. Noyes is, of course, in the middle. And this is sometime later. This is when she was given this, you'll see the clipping in a minute, a lifetime award, you might say. Some of you will know the lady on the far right here, and that's Mrs. Townsend. Paula Tannenbaum's mother. Mrs. Townsend's husband was a author, David, I believe. And he was an author, would write for the Aegis, but he also wrote a couple books, children's books, actually. But Mrs. Townsend was also a member, as we mentioned. So was Mary Woodward. The African-American lady in the background, to left, Mrs. Townsend's left, is Miss Gladys Williams. She is part of a family that is to Harford County in terms of African-American history, what the Mitchell family is to Baltimore. And this is a picture of her about 3-4 years ago when she was inducted into the Havre de Grace High School Hall of Fame. Now, of course, she wasn't allowed to go to Havre de Grace High School, but a few years ago, Havre de Grace High School began to incorporate into their membership those prominent individuals who are graduates of Havre de Grace Colored School. And so Mrs. Williams is part of that. Civil rights. We're still looking for it, I assume, the button, because Mrs. Noyes first heard Martin Luther King speak in 1959. She was in Washington in 1963. She was passionately in love with, an enormous admirer, respecter of Martin Luther King. And Mrs. Washburn told me that if you saw Mother, she probably had her WILFPF button and her Martin Luther King button on. And that is not the one, but it's obviously very appropriate for a woman who shared Martin Luther King's dream. He shared her dream. Now you see some local pictures, and there's nobody in here who doesn't remember this. Am I right? Even my wife remembers this, although she was in Minnesota. Well, my point is, this is the 50s and 60s in Bel Air, Maryland. Now, obviously, this is something that has totally galled Mrs. Noyes. And this is, of course, still standing, this building. Sadly, we lost the marquee and we lost the theater, but the building itself is still standing. And by the way, if you've seen the Aegis from yesterday, Amy O'Neill was one of the people who tried to save the Bel Air Theater as a theater. But I remember as a kid walking down Main Street with some of my 10, 12-year-old friends, African Americans, and we were going to the Saturday movies with our quarters, and I was allowed, this is from the 40s though, this picture, I was allowed to go up here and buy my ticket and go to these doors and sit downstairs. But those of you who remember, there's a narrow alley there, and that's where the African Americans, no matter whether they're 100 years old or 10 years old, they had to go down there and up the stairs, and the janitor would take their tickets and then let them sit in the balcony. There are a couple people at my last talk might remember this. Anybody remember anything about the Bel Air Courthouse? Why I would include that? Brady.
We're found in the basement. Yeah, it's separate in the coolest.
They had different water coolers.
Still in the basement. So it's a sign of the courthouse.
The colored and white sign.
Death. They let.
Does Bill Carr know that?
It's wrong.
Well, let's get it.
Why would he go down there?
Let's get it. Mariana, put that on your list. Okay, well, I remember, I grew up I didn't question this kind of stuff until I got a little broader view of the world. And in fact, it began in Richardson's drugstore. I'm sitting there, and we had just come from playing football at Wheeler's Lumberyard over here by Foster's Funeral Home, which is McComas is now. And kids would get together, kids from Central, the kids from St. Margaret's, the kids from Bel Air Elementary. We'd play football, let's say. Then we'd take our quarters and we'd go downtown and If we were early, we'd go into Richardson's drugstore, and we'd sit there at the counter, and we'd order our soda or whatever. And I look down there, and there's Putty Taylor down there, and Claude Taylor, and there's Robert Pressbury down there at the end, ordering takeout. They can't sit next to me, and Pat Close, and Tony Proto, and some of the Slayer boys, the twins. And I'm thinking, wait a minute now, that's Mrs. Pressbury waiting on me, and her son can't sit next to me. That's when I began to think about what in the world is going on here in this world. Well, right here in the lower left-hand corner, and this is a view of Bel Air Courthouse from Wall Street. Those of you who remember Wall Street, it's the Bel Air Courthouse from the Masonic Temple. And in the lower left-hand, it's too dark to see, that's where it said colored bathrooms. Where it said colored bathrooms. So this is not Montgomery, Alabama. This is not Selma, Alabama. This is not Georgia. This is not Mississippi. This is Bel Air, Maryland. And Bel Air, much less than Havre de Grace and Aberdeen, was segregated. By the way, there's only one, to my knowledge, John, catch me if I'm wrong on this, there was only one law, and that segregated the schools. Everything else was tradition. Everything else was what we call de facto segregation. It was based on custom and tradition. To my knowledge, in Harford County, the only law that physically separated blacks from whites was schools. And Dr. Willis, of course, did his best, along with the board, to maintain that. So there's Mrs. Adelaide Noyes' letter. Sad reading a few letters which trying to defend segregation. We're all human beings. Do we really want to be refused good accommodations in restaurants and hotels and hospitals? Do we really want to be denied homes of our own choosing? Do we want to be denied the education we seek? Do we really want to be denied well-paying jobs for which we are qualified? I wonder if the people who say, well, the decent colored people really want things to stay the way they are. I wonder if they can be so thick-skinned themselves that they say it in all honesty. She wonders if the people who say that. All races have much to learn and much to teach and much to learn from each other. I think that's the underlying philosophy of Adelaide Newcomer Noyes. And some of you may remember how Harford County, again, very sadly, was in the news because when the United Nations ambassadors would leave Washington to drive to New York, and when they were hungry or thirsty or needed to go to the bathroom, all these restaurants in Harford County, Route 40 especially, there's no county highway then, but they would be denied service. And so here was the ambassador to this, the ambassador to that. Here was a man wearing his national garb from Kenya, let's say, and being led out of a restaurant in Aberdeen or Havre de Grace at the point of a gun. So that's when the national civil rights groups and joining with the local chapters of the civil rights groups, and I just learned that Mrs. Noyes was a member of the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, as well as the NAACP. So she was involved, Jacob, she was involved with the effort to integrate especially restaurants at that time, and then housing and so forth. Go ahead, Jacob. Probably the single most dramatic thing, maybe short of falling dead in front of the White House for 2 hours, but the single most dramatic thing, and certainly the scariest thing Mrs. Noyes did at age 63 was to go down to Selma, Alabama on her own. You all didn't know where she was, did you? Okay, and if you did, you didn't have any idea that it was so dangerous to be down in Selma, Alabama. But she went down to Selma, Alabama, and that's what greeted people in those days. And this monument in the middle is still there, okay, in the park, Jacob. And her job, voluntary job, was to help register voters. Again, you know, I like to think that this is Mrs. Noyes right here. And she lived with a black family, and she said she was worried. What was she worried about? She's worried about the black family that let her live with them and let this these civil rights workers from New York, these carpetbaggers, from the north, these carpetbaggers come down there. That's who she said she was worried about. But she did stay just a week, I believe. And as I say, the single most dramatic thing. She's very much involved. Go ahead, Jacob. Go ahead. As you can imagine, in anti-nuclear matters. And of course, living here in Harford County with Edgewood Arsenal, with Aberdeen Proving Ground, and with Fort Detrick over there in Frederick and who knows what else around, she was very involved in picketing and going to demonstrating against any of those kind of facilities. These happened to be, the ladies at top happened to be Quakers, and of course, it was not just Quakers. It was, of course, one of the things that surprised the living daylights out of Richard Nixon, that it wasn't just the pointy-head fanatics. I got called one of them all the time. Who was this? The lady of the Board of Education. Because we wanted to save the school. Talked about the fanatics coming out of the woodwork. So Edgewood and Fort McKinley and Pete Seeger, love Pete Seeger. And the right-hand column of the top thing talks about including the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. At one point, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom had a plaque, and they asked to be admitted to the base, and of course they were denied to speak to anybody in any kind of authority. So they had this plaque, and since they weren't allowed to enter the base, they wired the plaque to the fence, giving Edgewood the dubious honor for excellence in pollution and propaganda. So, Vietnam War and the military draft. Peace is a woman's issue. Our patriotic duty is to dissent. Go ahead, Jacob. And that is Mrs. Noyes, of course, in the right. White House. That, don't believe that's the day they all lay down. Haven't found a picture of that yet. I've gone to the Times, I've gone to the Post, gone to the Sun, but I haven't found any photographs. And that's what I've been speaking about. 40 other companions from Maryland and Pennsylvania, along with one sheepdog. Wasn't your sheepdog, was it? Did you have a sheepdog, Mrs. Washburn? No? Okay, well, they dropped dead one by one before a presidential guard. Okay, go ahead. She also believed in world order. She believed in one government. And I remember hearing, I guess it's before I stopped listening to WBAL. I just can't listen to WBAL anymore. But I remember Ron Smith railing against people who believe, like Nelson Rockefeller, and I'm going to try to remember all the Republicans, Mac Mathias, Nelson Rockefeller, Mayor McKeldin. What was his name? Theodore Roosevelt McKeldin, right. They believed in that. They were part of that. And, of course, it's total anathema to people who emphasize the sovereignty of the United States and the United States' unwillingness to listen to any other advice or join into agreements with other groups. Life at Hazel Dell. Peace and tranquility. Now, this is the picture, and the only thing missing is the Martin Luther King button. See, now, you can see here, and then that is a WILPF button. I think I'll go out on the internet and just buy one of those. Just, if I knew which Martin Luther King button she had, I'd find that too. Life at Hazel Dell, all peace and calm. Okay, now Hazel Dell, you've all been by it 1,000 times. You can't see it in the last 10, 15 years because maybe it was Eric Cook who planted all those trees. And we can't see back into the house that was built in what, 1840s or 50s, Jim?
Somewhere like that.
Stevenson Archer, who was prominent locally, as all archers are prominent locally, and who went on to become, the treasurer of the state of Maryland, who was related to General Archer and Major Archer, the Archers, as we call them. He built that for his Louisiana bride, as I recall, a lady from the South, because it will remind you of a house out in the bayou. And of course, large windows, low roof, air moving different directions, keeps the place cool. But that's part of, 20 acres or more, something like that, that was used in a variety of ways. Certainly the equestrian activities. I remember reading about the pony club meeting there as a kid. Part of the family property that adjoins Hall Street, down at the foot of Hall Street before you go into the big housing development, was the Little League field. And that's probably where I first saw Mrs. Noyes, this lady who would walk over from the house and stand there at the fence in right field. And there is Mrs. Washburn in the right, and that's her sister Margaret in the middle, members of, was it you or your sister who was that great champion? They wrote about that big article they wrote about. Was it Margaret or was it you? It was you?
Champion. Why?
As a 12-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl? Yeah, well, you were the one they did the feature article on. Okay, and there's the idea of giving you the cross ventilation. That's what I'm trying to say. And some of the items that Mrs. Noyes from the Newcomer family brought with her too. They bought that in 1941, by the way. Came to Bel Air in 1941, directly from Long Green. And of course started their own. Was your track half a mile?
That one kid.
Oh,
Which track?
was the track half a mile?
How long was the track?
The what?
On your property?
Yeah.
No, your words track.
Where you trained the horses?
Oh, just on the front field and that field.
So it wasn't even half a mile, quarter mile? Okay, I knew you didn't have a regular track. But at least the baseball field, you can drive down there today and just stand there. It's still in pasture. You can just see how bulldozer has cut out a baseball field. Still there. The ghost of Jimmy Chrismer. And Mrs. Noyes was one of the very first. When the Historic Preservation Act went into existence, it suggested making up a local committee to designate people to be named living treasures. And Mrs. Noyes was among the list with June Weeks, Wilmer Cronin, Rowena Farney, Broadnax Cameron, Julia Cameron, Walter Banks. Walter Banks was an ally of Mrs. Noyes with the NAACP. So they are among the first individuals to be named a living treasure. Unfortunately, every one of them was tape recorded except Mrs. Noyes. She did not get tape recorded. Mary Woodward, of course, close friend, was part of the cultural arts of Harford County. Jacob. And finally, I think this is finally, the Little Falls, I believe it was, established on behalf of these five women, and especially, on behalf of Adelaide Noyes, a special fund down at Johns Hopkins through the office of the chaplain to be given to a student worthy, I don't know whether the student studies peace studies or whether the student practices, better yet, do both. But there is, to my knowledge, although I have not written the office, it was Pastor Wickmeyer. You may remember the name Wickmeyer. And that's it again. And standing on the shoulders. That's Jane Addams and people like that. Go ahead, Jacob. And the Newcomer monument is down at Woodlawn Cemetery, and there is that stone to the right with Mrs. Noyes' name on it. But as I mentioned to you, Mrs. Noyes donated her body to science. But they have their own plot at Woodlawn. And we'll end with that. True peace is not merely the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. So that, along with the end of that one letter about we all have things to learn from each other, I think captures the essence of Adelaide Newcomer Noyes' life. Thank you very much.
We have a few more moments. If someone has some questions, we'll see it in a Jim or so. Adelaide can answer them.
Yes.
Exactly. Here.
It's on the corner of Rock Spring Road and Moores Mill Road.
The
Vale, on that side called Vale. It's sort of catty corner across from Bel Air Memorial Gardens. But behind it, it's right there by the bypass.
yeah,
Used to be a lot quieter in their house than it is now.
that's actually went through the back field.
But here she got.
Dave,
Yeah, but I believe after she died, they established an annual lecture. Adelaide Noyes lecture at Capsule. Is that still the thing?
I don't know. I can certainly ask that. One of my former students works down in the archives. She was very helpful. I can find that out just as I should have called the chaplain's office at Hopkins. But they still have a chapter of the WILPF at Goucher. Brady?
How did this interview with the Stanford come about? Is that she didn't get it?
It's part of their WILPF collection. It's overwhelmingly interviews with California women. As you can imagine, California, especially Southern California, they have all kinds of chapters. And there are hundreds of women who are interviewed. And then they have this other little thing at the end of about maybe 15 or 20 women. It says, other chapters. And you have to be patient in this business. And I knew she wasn't a member of the San Jose chapter or whatever. So I went down, found the other chapters, didn't know it was there, but was glad to see. And I talked to them on the phone 2 or 3 times. I emailed back and forth 3 or 4 times. Literally, they have now made an exception to their stated policy online. And I guess it's basically people who don't want the sound recording. If you'd like the sound recording, I guess you could get that. But I said, well, I just needed the transcript, and I'm talking about a guy who retired. I'm talking about a historical society that is lucky at the end of the month to pay its light bills and stuff like that. And so 2 or 3, 4 or 5 back and forth, they finally came out and said, we have decided to make a change in our policy. And I still didn't know when it would come, but there it was. It wasn't in my mailbox this morning at, what I leave the house, 9:30. If it had been, I would have had a lot to read during all those presentations down there at the Legion meeting.
Or did it blown in here? Was it they talked?
No, she was there on site with one of their WILPF people. And then that, in turn, was donated to Stanford University. Stanford University, remember, is associated with Herbert Hoover, a Quaker, a pacifist. Not particularly effective president at the time, but Quaker and a pacifist. That it? Oh, yes.
What about?
I'd be the start of what?
Yeah, in your research, did you find this anything connected with how women getting elected up?
Interesting you bring that up. She wasn't interested in that. She said that movement is well enough along. They've got enough spokesmen for that. So she deliberately said, no, I'm not particularly interested in that. I forgot to mention when we saw the picture of the house there, that she would invite individuals who were traveling through the county or on their way someplace or whatever, demonstrators, to use the grounds as a place to camp out. I suspect there were probably some people in the house at one time or another. And my good friend Eric tells me there's on the wall a picture of individuals, peace marchers or something, on the grounds having a picnic on the wall of your house, which you didn't show me.
At least I knew Grandma Noyes as grandchildren of their grandmother, and she never really shared a lot of what she was doing. I think she was always openly asked, but being young, we didn't ask. She read to us, and we played dress up with things in the closet, and we had wonderful moments. So I just want to say I really appreciate you doing all this work.
Oh, it's fun. It's fun. Richard sort of was right. I just get into a subject and I keep with it. So really, to have grown up in this community with this lady, and my talk earlier today was on Alfred B. Hilton, a Medal of Honor winner, the only Medal of Honor winner from Harford County in all our history. And I think it's important that people in the community, but it's important in general, to bring the past back to life. Years and years ago, before he became really all that famous, and before certainly he became infamous, Bill Cosby did a film. It was on television, and it was called Black History. Could just as easily be called Women's History. It could have been called Peace History, but it was called Black History, Lost, Strayed, or Stolen. And so I sort of made a little vow as a young man that I was going my best to bring it back. And I love the idea of recreating the past so the present. Because other than Edna Goldberg, there's nothing in print about Mrs. Noyes. So,
Well, Jim, thank you very much on behalf of the society and all of those here.
thank you very much. My pleasure.
You did a good job.
Thank you, Richard.